So, by way of introduction for our next speaker, Tom Azlin, N4ZPT, Ham Radio Digital Communications, Data Communications at the U.S. Marine Corps Marathon. And you're up, Tom?
Thank you. Howdy. I guess what I want to do is show both the mix of what are the conditions that we're operating under, why we chose what we chose, pictures of what we do, and then some of the technology that we're using. And this is just a picture of, on Columbus Day, we run a communications exercise that the Marine Corps Marathon staff supports and make sure that everything works for the 2 weeks later actual marathon. So that's a picture of us setting up with the Marine Corps Marathon's publicity van sitting there. So here's our context. It's been about 34 years that this race has been going. There's, they expect 25,000 of the registered to show up. In addition, there's a parallel 10K race running on the same course, so that's the another 5,000. We're right downtown, so we cover multiple places. The ham radio work is in direct support of the U.S. Navy medics, and just being downtown, it's lots of people looking. And maybe 4 years ago, we had a day that was very hot, and we overwhelmed our one packet channel, so that caused us to go look for other alternatives. And the one comment that the Marathon Program Office requires me to say is our use of any particular company's radios isn't an endorsement by the U.S. Marine Corps. So here's what we've been doing. We've been supporting this race for about 3 decades. 2 years ago, the Amateur Radio Service was the Volunteer of the Year for the Marine Corps Marathon. We're actually fairly happy with their talking about the ham radio support to the marathon. And I think I said our customer is the medics, but we also are a backup to the communications that the Marine Corps brings to the race. We started this very early on when the race was small, and it was a single FM net was fine. We added packet almost 20 years ago. The number of nets has grown as the race has gotten larger. The traffic just got to be too heavy. And we are now using 9600 baud packet and the 120K D-Star digital data mode. This is just a picture of where we are, and I can't see at this angle too well, but this is the bridge that goes over to the Lincoln Memorial. Right in this area is where the Iwo Jima Monument is, the Marine Corps War Memorial. That's the start line. The race goes from there out into Arlington, then comes back along the GW Parkway, goes across right there, up, and goes around the Georgetown Reservoir, comes down, goes all the way down around Haynes Point. Used to be down there was a statue that stuck out of the ground called the Awakening, and they've moved it. And then goes out onto the mall, and then comes back, goes down into Crystal City, and then goes back and finishes. So basically the finish line is at about the center of a star where the race goes in and out around those. And the dots that are on the screen, some of them like right there, are places where there are ham radio operators. Not shown on this, and I'll show it on a later map, is where the aid stations are. We kick off in May as they kick off their meetings. 3 of us are there, what they call special projects officers. I'm the one for medical tracking. We have a National Capital Area Amateur Radio Council that does the recruiting. It's not any one club or any one organization that supports it. The people are from all the regional clubs, and we have people coming in from around the country. Texas and Washington State one year. I talked about the exercise. We have an all hands the week before the race where the medics talk about why we're there, what we're doing for them, what the rules are, things like that. And we're fully integrated into the race. We've been working with the Marines for so long that, for example, the park permits. This race is occurring on a national monument. there's very strict rules about what can happen. We can't park on the grass. They have to help us find a place to park our vehicles with all our gear, things like that. For some of us, it's a very long day, and we have about 100 hams out across the race at a lot of different spots. What the Navy medics say is we're their eyes and ears on the race. The Marines are taught that if there's a runner down out on the course, find the ham wearing the green vest. They've standardized on green vests for us. All the other colors were taken for other purposes. And so we're the ones who actually put the call into the ops center that gets the message over to either the Arlington Fire EMS transport or the DC Fire EMS transport to either have basic or advanced life support go pick up the person and take them to a hospital, in addition to the aid stations. And this is just a few slides. The comms trailer there is where the Marines have all the TCOM gear that they're using. They have a couple 80-kilowatt generators. That's one of their radios. Two of these are our radios. This one is our radios. That one's ours. And then there's Wi-Fi stuff out there. This year, in 05, we used a couple packet radios, and we had previously been using 1200 baud, but it got choked that previous year. This year, in 05, we were going to have one 9600 baud, one 1200 baud. And then the aid station, or a person at aid station, this was their setup. So it's very simple. This was the 1200 baud guy. We had other people, AMRAD, who we've got AMRAD stuff out in the back, brought a big van with a 40-foot pneumatic mast and antenna rotators up on top to point at us, and they had their gear set up inside the van. And this is sort of what was there that year. The interesting thing is 9600 baud did not work. We tested it at various LAN parties that we had been running. It worked fine. We got out on the course. It didn't work. It might have been because the place we tested it with, that aid station had a D7, and 9600 wasn't working on that D7. We don't know. So we just abandoned it and flipped it to 1200 and had two 1200 baud packet modems. We were using a Linux laptop using some custom software that we borrowed from the Twin Cities Marathon folks, and then modified it to handle our particular data input needs to go into the medical database. At our aid stations, what our hams do is check the runners in and check them out of the database. That way the medics at the finish line can find out how many runners they have at aid stations. They can check the health of the race, what kind of things are happening across the race, things like that. The same thing that happened in 05 was that's when ICOM came out with the ID1 and the access point. And sort of a light bulb went off that if we're having trouble with packet, then perhaps we ought to try the ID1 radios the next year. So for 06, we sat down with the medics. We got their requirements. They wanted to be able to use a web interface to go to the database because their medics are trained on that web interface. The D-Star DD mode gear is Ethernet transport, so that just provides native transparent support to them. They also are very picky about having service, so are picky or insistent on 100% reliability. So we had parallel networks, the packet network in parallel with the D-Star digital NATA network. And there was the implementation. We worked with the sports company to make sure the interface worked well. We got up both modems and got them working. We did the test. We switched to Windows laptops for a gateway for one simple reason, and that was the GUI for managing the access point are Windows applications. So we went out and used AGWPE and Tel Manager so that a packet connect turned into a telnet to the database, and inside that database we had a non-standard telnet listener that the same guys that wrote our software the previous year wrote custom software, and it today still lives in that database, which is a little bit of an interesting thing because we have to remind the commercial sports database company every year that don't forget that ham radio software. It needs to be loaded and running. In getting ready for the marathon in '06, we took all the ID1s that we had. We bought 5 ID1s the year they had the buy 5, get an access point free. So we set those up at one of our volunteers' houses, and we started learning how to use these radios. First thing we got working was peer-to-peer bridging between 2 ID1s. And we proved that if we had sets of ID1s, we could actually connect all the aid stations just fine. It took us a couple LAN parties before we figured out the settings for the access point because it's different the way we use it. We don't use the dual-homed ICOM software running on a gateway server. So we had to change the settings in the access point controller. But we finally figured that out. So we just set up outside and did lots of testing. And by the way, we made sure that the packet stuff was still working. We then went out on the course, and with cover from the Marines, we set up at the finish line area, which is the Marine Corps War Memorial, as well as out on at the aid stations. And so what I had in the back of my truck was the access point, and not shown is the packet radios. Then we had people out with, there's an ID1 back in here connected to a laptop with our Sun Shield, which worked really nicely. One of our other hams, Maitland A4HS, took his ID1 without a control head on it, hooked it into a Wi-Fi access point, and then just his plan, which is what he executed, he parked his car about 100 feet away from the aid station, and he just took his laptop over to the aid station, and it worked fine. And he used the homebrew antenna. That's an 8-loop reflected antenna. Worked fine. He was about a mile away from the finish line looking across the Potomac River, so that just worked fine. On the way there, the Marines wanted us to prove this all worked. So I took my truck down to the program office for the Marine Corps Marathon and then set up a user station inside their conference room. So we had a packet modem and the D-Star with it's kind of hard to see here, but I made a little quarter wave antenna out of peeling back the braid on a piece of coax. And we demonstrated that it worked. To do this, we actually had to get the sports database company to put their database online for this event, which they were happy to do. We then set it up in that comms trailer. And so this is the setup in a comms trailer. The Marines give us, used to be half a rack, but they give us a full rack of space in that comms trailer. And so what we put up is the controller, and then this is the year we had 2 of the radios along with a DCI 10 megahertz filter. It's actually an ATV filter that we use. And then sitting up on top of the controller are our 2 packet channels. And then we had our laptop that's running our gateway software, and then we had other gear, laptops, and the voice radios that we use to keep in contact with the rest of the people out on the course. The voice traffic for the nets is up on 440. We take that net over in the 2 to 3 hours before the race to do all the troubleshooting to make sure that everybody's computer is working before we get there. So this year, everything worked. So 2006, we were very happy. And the expectation from the medics was that there would be they needed a high bandwidth. So the next year, we basically dropped 1,200 baud packet. Here's another picture. It is the same picture, but I wanted to point out something. They put a very high gain 1,200 megahertz antenna up on that mast. That aid station was right there. That's where the finish line is. It actually worked. We think that the buildings that were up in here gave us knife edge refraction, and we were able to actually get down in because the pointing angle on that Yagi was right on the actual true direction to the aid station. In other cases, we've had our antenna is actually pointed backwards, reflecting off buildings. So there's the 2007 setup. One of the things we discovered was that the Kenwood radios worked perfectly out of the box on 9600 baud. We had other people with other pieces that they had more work to do because they had to worry about setting the levels. But everybody who had a D700, it worked just fine. When we say most of the stations had 23 centimeter DD running, one station ended up plugging their radio in backwards and blowing the internal fuse. ICOM fixed it for free. Another station couldn't get the laptop network settings right for browsing, but it turns out that you can open a telnet window and telnet in to the same place that we do our tel manager connection to, and you just have a 128K packet connection. It works fine, and you actually are using packets because you're sending Ethernet packets across the air. So this is one of our aid stations in 07. This is the one that had their antenna pointed backwards. This is I-395. It's a huge, massive concrete wall that's between this aid station and everything north. So that's what they used. There's a picture of one of our big aid stations, and then we have a desk and chair, or a table and chairs inside that. So here's Steve, one of our operators. There's another interesting point here, is that if you're a good typist and you understand the command set that we've created, you can enter stuff as fast on packet as you can on D-Star. The thing that we use that because our medics are used to using the web interface. They're used to doing pull-down menus, and they don't do command line stuff very well. So we've got both. And at this particular station, they were alternating entering data and racing to see how fast they could get the data entered. So there's a nice competition going on there. Because it works so well, what we actually did is put in just one 9600 baud channel and one radio. We had our other radio set so that we could put it up on top of a 20-story building that's near the finish line, but we didn't need to do that. And the picture you saw of the rack there, if you turn and look back towards the other half of the comms trailer, what you see is all the other people in the comms trailer. The people doing the timing, getting the data off the timing mats were in there. The Marine wireline guys that were in there. So we were all using that trailer. At this point, we figured that maybe we'll just drop 9600 baud packet because the sports company is sometimes hard to deal with. Actually, they're very easy to deal with, but it's work on our part to get that put back in. So next year, we had a problem. The three stations that the previous year worked fine, including the one that was 8.7 or 7.8, simply didn't work. They worked fine on Saturday before the race. We brought them up on Sunday, and none of the ones south of 395 worked. Packet carried the day. So we're going to continue using Packet. But at that point, we put up a plan for the next year, which is try to get fixed infrastructure in place, that we don't have to keep putting it up. Try to put the gear up in October and leave it up on rooftops in proper shelters for the entire year. And we're going to keep our 9600 baud packet gateways. One of them is going into the Armed Forces Retirement Home north of the Capitol. One of them, we're negotiating with the Pentagon Mars Station to put the gear in the Pentagon Mars Station. That way it'll simplify our life in future years. And we're trying to get things off of the finish line area. That turns out to be highly chaotic, and that's the one where you have to be there at 3 in the morning, and you don't get out of there until 5 in the afternoon. So right now, where are we? We're about a month from the race. We're negotiating for these fixed installations. We're getting our plans set up for Columbus Day, making sure we have the park permits with all the right words in it. We're out recruiting our volunteers. I think we're about 80 out of the 100 volunteers that we need at this point, and it's going to go very, very fast. This is what the whole picture looks like for this year with the aid stations. There's an aid station right here. There's an aid station right here. There's 2 on the mall down by the Washington Monument. There's an aid station right down here. There's one right south of the Pentagon, and then there's one on the sort of final stretch. So those are the stations that use both the 9600 baud packet radios as well as the D-Star gear. We are close to getting something put up on top of the Pentagon. There's a radio club downtown that has a full D-Star stack now, so we're working on making sure that one works. There's the 20-story building right here that we're trying to get onto, and then there's a hotel, a DoubleTree hotel that looks out over the course that is one possible location, plus the Metropolitan Area Airport Authority paid for a full D-Star stack. And so that stack is part of that stack is going to be put in for the race, and that radio will be on top of the hangar, which it's actually, the location is like here, but it looks right out on Haynes Point. So between those stations, we're hoping to get full coverage for this coming year. We found 23 centimeters that is an interesting band to work on. So what we're going to be doing is this our trailer is going to be pulled back down and will be set up. And then on race day, we'll have, instead of all this high-speed data that's sitting there, what we'll do is we'll have our standard voice stations that go into the Command Operations Center sitting there instead, and it'll make life a lot easier for us, we hope. So I guess I've gone very fast. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, and I guess it was 2008, I guess. The D-Star worked the weekend before, and then the day of the race it didn't. I don't remember. I may have missed it, but did you say why?
We don't know why. We speculated 2 things. One is that in the taking down and setting back up, we broke something. The other thing is that we have occasionally seen very high interference levels, almost like people welding. Maybe there was interference. We don't know.
I was curious, you mentioned a lot of times about the database. Are there any HIPAA issues or anything like that you've considered or had concerns about?
We were very concerned about that, and we talked to the Surgeon General of the U.S. Navy, and he went with and worked with judge advocate people of the U.S. Navy, and they came back and basically said, for our role in this race, there are no HIPAA issues. That's our race specific on the role we have. The runners sign waivers, and he said that those waivers are part of that, but when they walked through the HIPAA tree, that was not an issue. The other thing is the Marine Corps Marathon is a member of the Road Runners Club of America, which insures liability insurance for volunteers. So that means we have to sign waivers ourselves, which basically say we understand that we're not employees of the U.S. government and that there's no advantages to being a volunteer to the Marine Corps Marathon. But that conveys this liability insurance, so it's worth signing.
Thank you very much. You actually gave more time to Bob Berninga, as we all know.
Well, I'll say something. He gives us special permission for these events to run wider than normal APRS packets. So thank you.
Did y'all, I know your mission is the first aid and stuff, but was there any APRs at all at the marathon?
Well, yeah, there was considerable. I should have mentioned that. The Marine Corps has a number of vehicles they consider tactically significant. We tend to adopt, after 30 years, we tend to adopt their terminology. So we used a portion of what APRS is capable of by putting trackers in the vehicle that carries all the news crews in front of the first runner. We're with the tail end Charlie. We are on the troubleshooting vehicles that they go around and make sure the course is ready before the race. We've looked at using more of APRS, for example, knowing how many runners are waiting to be picked up at an aid station by simply doing a message. So there's a lot of things like that that we're incorporating. The Marines like that part of what we do because it lets them know where we are. They have surveillance video up, and at one point the colonel in charge said, "Where's the lead runner?" We said, "Oh, he's at XY location." They slewed the surveillance cameras over, and right into the field of view came the lead runner. And that was because of our tracking. Like more often than not, we'll find the folks running the race clustered around the APRS display.
Yeah, I just think you might want to mention, you told me last night, that the runners all are encoded, and that's how you're able to track them, which I think is very different than a lot of other races, where they just have they're wearing something on their chest or something.
Well, I think there was a translation error there. All the runners in certified events run RFIDs, and so the runners go across timing mats that give them their splits. Well, we're able to go dig into the database from the aid stations and find out where the runner is. So if we have questions about where a runner is, you just go look that up. That's what I intended to mean.
No, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.